So today I'll be talking to you about the Blind Scientist Toolkit that I actually developed over the years, and it's for multisensorial science. So like I said at the beginning, if I ask a question, I would really love a verbal response from everybody in the audience. Sounds good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be talking about the Blind Scientist Toolkit that I've developed over the years. It's just basically a culmination of every tool I've ever used, because I realized, you know what? Let me share that with the world. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My name is Mona Makara. I am a professor of bioengineering at Northeastern University. I only have light perception. I've been blind since I was 7 years old, and I love science. I love science. I love doing anything. I just love exploring the world. I've always been like that since I was a child. This might not hit here because I'm in Finland right now, but do you guys know about the Magic School Bus?
Yes.
Yes? Very nice. So I was really influenced by the Magic School Bus when I was a child. And Bill Nye the Science Guy?
Yes.
Very good. And so I also really love storytelling. I think it's really important that when you do science or anything else that you do, if you want to share it, you have to figure out how to best storytell it. So that's very important to me. So that's a little bit about myself. And like I said, I've been blind since I was 7 years old. And I've always been interested in doing research and doing scientific research. Well, I didn't know about scientific research when I was a kid. I just knew about science. And so then the days passed on, right? I grew up. It was a struggle. We're not going to talk all about these details here because I'm here today to talk to you about the Blind Scientist Toolkit. But I think one of the things that I learned is in order to do science, you have to have tools, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to have tools. Whatever type of scientist that you are, whether you're a chemist, or you're a physicist, you have your tools. And I also learned that without even realizing in the beginning that I personally also needed my own set of tools. Make sense? I think when I was around graduate school, so I ended up getting my PhD in chemistry at the University of Florida. I did it at the Quantum Theory Project. My PhD was in physical chemistry. And when I went off to go to grad school, I still was kind of cobbling things together, which makes sense, right? Every problem that came up, every single piece of element that had lack of access, I took it individually and tried to figure out how to access it. So I had cobbled up all these different solutions, but I'd never really kind of put them together. And when I was in grad school, I realized, wait, there must be other blind people out there that want to do science too, and that want to do chemistry. And let me at least share the tools that I've used. And this started, I actually created the web page. So this is a web page you can all visit, and I'll have a QR code at the end of the presentation that has every tool I've ever used to do my science. Make sense? So I cobbled it all together and started to see some patterns, but and back then it was really in its amateur stages. And I started to build it up. So what's in this toolkit? I broke it down from literally general topics into what software I use, what hardware I use, but I also broke it down into different stages of my academic career. What did I use in the classroom? What did I use as a researcher? What do I use as a teacher now? Because now I'm a professor and I have to teach biomolecular dynamics and control. Does anybody know what that is? No? Okay. Think of it, chemical kinetics, but for biomolecules. Does that make sense?
Yes. Wow.
Okay, so I like the wow, thank you. So a lot of mathematical derivations, I really enforce my students. They have to learn how to derive first order rate law, second order rate law. That all has to happen in my class. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But all those tools that I figured it out are all on this page, okay? Publicly available. And the reason why I put it all together is I really hope that some people in the future might find it useful. And it doesn't necessarily mean that what worked for me might work for you, right? We're all different and we're all different individuals, but at least it's a repository. So you'll have different stages of my life are in there, career-wise and what tools I use for them, but also things like how I work with access assistants. How do I choose which access assistant to work with? How do I interview? And then everything from low-cost solutions to more expensive solutions that, as a professor, I have more access to certain, like, pricier solutions. Okay. So I think another thing that you'll see throughout the Blind Scientist Toolkit that I have is it evolved and it also changed with the different tasks I had to do in my career, right? So a lot of times, unfortunately, we see solutions that are made for students, but not necessarily made for the next stage up. Does that make sense? Yeah. So like in there, I even talk about how do I do an academic conference. Has anybody been to the American Chemical Society conference? That's pretty far from here. So I feel like the answer would probably be no. Fair enough, but I just was at that conference last week, and it's 15,000 people showed up. This is not easy for me to navigate, right? How did I do it? And I've been going since like 2009, since I was an undergrad. Okay, this I think is a really interesting element. So by the way, just throughout this presentation, I'm just flipping slides, and on the slides are not really anything, just they're kind of images that go along with what I'm saying, but nothing more. Like it's not, it's visual, what do you call it? Like a visual accessory to what I'm saying. But right now we have, I think, a picture of my Braille note taker on the screen, right? Yes. And so this is a really interesting story. Even though I've been blind since I was 7 years old, back then, like in the 90s, it was just like a theme for people to be like, oh, you're blind, you don't need to learn Braille, you can do everything auditorially. So I did not learn Braille as a child. And notice I said I did not learn Braille as a child. Guess when I learned it? Literally 4 years ago. But I learned it, right? And that allowed me to incorporate another whole set of tools. See, I believe part of being a successful scientist is also making sure that you have the right tools, right? And sometimes you have to cobble up your tool, you have to create your tool, or sometimes you have to learn a new skill to be able to use a new tool. And so I learned Braille, and I'm currently reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in Braille, and I'm really proud of myself, even though I read it very slowly. But I incorporate the sense of touch now in my tools. So I think part of my articles of clothing right now are actually labeled in Braille. Okay. And that also led me to realizing, well, now I'm a teacher, right? So I don't know if you all know, but if you're a professor at an R1 institution in the United States, you also have to lead a group of students to do research, right? So I have to lead a research team. Well, how do I do that? As a blind individual, what kind of tools do I need? And so it really kind of cracked open this entire series of recognizing that me, the blind professor, my sighted student, we have to figure out how to share data, right? Yeah. And in this, and then probably not very commonly, right? Like I'm the PI, but I'm the blind one, right? And then my student is sighted. So how do we share it? So it actually opened up a whole avenue of problem solving, and so this opened up a whole field. We need to be able to engineer multisensorial tools. What else do we have on this slide right now? Can somebody describe it to me?
Yeah, there's a magazine cover thing
Yeah.
called Science Advances with a gray box with chemicals.
Yes. So basically, this led to a collaboration. Thank you very much. So this is a publication. So we got the cover of Science Advances for a publication where we collaborated with a professor down in Baylor. His name is Brian Shaw. So this professor actually has a blind kid himself. He himself is not blind, but he was like, wait, chemistry is so inaccessible to blind individuals. Mona, do you want to collaborate and make chemistry accessible? And I was like, yes, let's do it. And so he came up with this idea of using, lithography, right? Lithophanes. Basically, we were on NPR for this, so which was really cool. NPR is a national public radio in the United States. Yay. Yeah, which is really cool. We're not gonna listen to it right now. But basically, oh, let me pass out. You guys want to see the lithophanes? So the reason why this really got a lot of attention is now we have one form of data. Do y'all see it in my hand?
Yes.
For anybody who can't see, I basically have a piece of plastic that is translucent enough so that the light can shine through, but the data on it is visible to a sighted person, and it's tactily experienced by a blind person. Make sense? So yeah, we got published in Science Advances, and then we are also on NPR for the lithophanes. Great idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. Okay. The other thing is, this is something that Brian Shaw came up with. So these are all linked up onto the page. Do y'all see mouth models on the screen? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, this is even cooler in my opinion. So, apparently, Brian Shaw one day was sitting there and noticed that this 2-year-old was putting everything in their mouth. Okay? Normal, right?
Yeah.
But then he was like, wait, like maybe this is the way the kid is exploring the world. And so actually he did some research. It turns out we do have like a higher resolution ability with our mouth than we do with our hands. So then he came up with the idea of 3D printing proteins using dental resin. So it's safe. So I've put these in my mouth because you will immediately then be able to get the 3D structure of the protein from putting it in your mouth. So you guys want to see these two? You don't take them out. Don't put them in your mouth. Yes, they have been cleaned, but still, that's weird. So basically, I study these pulmonary surfactant, which is a substance found in your lungs, and it's made up of proteins and lipids, and it's really important for me to understand the structure of these proteins. And so I have a bunch of, I just brought a couple right now of these mouth models. Isn't that awesome? Yeah, that you can have the resolution to like sense the structure of this protein by just putting it in your mouth. Multisensorial, right? Okay, so I talked about how there was a challenge for teaching. I actually ended up publishing a paper about how I came about doing it. Do y'all want to hear how I teach? It's a little bit like how we're doing right now, right? Okay, so the way I teach is very interactive, but in order for me to do all these like really in-depth derivations, I had to come up with a way in which everything was typed up in advance, projected on the screen, kind of like I'm doing with the PowerPoint, and I have to memorize it verbatim, precisely, which isn't that hard because I understand it, but the problem is, even in mathematics, right, you can get to the same answer by even switching around. You can have different ways to get the same answer, right? So I had to make sure that I'm really precise. I gave my students blanked out versions of the notes, and I basically went through it with them verbally as they saw the accompanying math on the screen. Does that make sense? And so I published a paper about the first time I ever taught, and it was really interesting, the results that we got, because I ran like I actually did a survey at the end of the class that was anonymous, and it was really fascinating. Do you want to hear some of the things the students said?
Yeah.
Well, one student was like, wow, I thought that it would be really hard to learn from a blind person, but actually it wasn't. So that's cool. Another student, what? Yeah, another student said that they thought the material would be so visual, but it isn't, which I thought was really fascinating. I do consider this material to be very visual, but showing that it's possible for a blind person to teach it was really great, right? And then finally, another comment that really stuck was the student informed me in the anonymous survey that their parents were really mad and upset to find out that their kid had a blind professor, because they thought that they wouldn't be able to teach well. But then this student ended up telling me that this was one of the best classes he ever had. And then he actually came forth and told me the comment too. That's why I know it's a he. But it was a really interesting experience for me. It was really challenging. I didn't know who I can necessarily go to and be like, how do you teach biomolecular dynamics and control as a blind person? So the different strategies I came up with are also on the Blind Scientist Tool page, and they're published. So you can read the publication there. So another thing that I had said is that like the challenge of, or the uniqueness of figuring out how to work with Access Assistants. So sometimes like, you know, you want to make sure you get an Access Assistant that knows how to describe, but doesn't necessarily interpret. Do y'all know the difference between description and interpretation, right? That's really interesting, and sometimes it's very challenging because we all live within the lens of who we are, right? So even if somebody's describing, it's going to be described differently by different people. So how do you work with that? And you have to almost come up with the skill set of learning how to ask questions, right? And every human being you end up working with is going to have their own unique lens. So you have to almost work together and figure that out. Yeah. And then how do you interview for an Access Assistant so that it will be a good, you know, partnership in the work down the line? You are leading the work, but that person is your eyes in that way. And, you know, they're supposed to be there to describe for you, right? So it's a really unique interaction. It's a really unique working relationship. And it's a very unique, like, parsing out. You have to understand as a blind individual who's using the difference between description and interpretation. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the current projects right now, because we're still developing I'm going to be developing the Blind Scientist tools until probably the day I die, right? It's just part of who we are, right? If you want to be a successful scientist, then you have to make sure you have the right tools. What does that look like? And there's always going to be problems that you need to solve, and that might mean developing a new tool. So that's exciting, and it might be developing new skills like reading Braille or learning how to sonify the data. I actually tell a story that I'm not going to be talking about today, but I tell a story about how I found patterns in a protein that my sighted peers missed because I had a certain different set of tools, right? Because I was blind, I had to interact with the data differently, and that allowed me to figure out information about that protein that my sighted peers missed. Yeah, so cool. If you want to learn more, ask me a question at the end. Okay, so one of the first projects we're working on is I'm working with the Chemists with Disabilities, but I'm talking to different publishers in the scientific community, especially in the chemistry community. Publish your literature accessible, right? The literature right now, scientific literature, the majority of it is inaccessible to me. That's not good, right? Because knowledge is access. You have to have access to knowledge to be able to do science. And so, it's really cool. I'm talking to the editor-in-chief of Science, Holden Thorpe, right now. So we're trying to move that along. Another project, and if you all will be around at the end of the day today, I'll be talking about that, which is the Science in Braille Global Campaign. It's a group of us blind scientists that come together, and we're trying to really work on the mission that blind individuals, not only do they have a right to be in science, but science needs blind individuals. Science needs people of all walks of life, of all different perspectives, right? And so this is a group. We've spoken at the United Nations. We're actually having a big day at the United Nations on October 31st. It's the first ever day, Science in Braille Global Campaign Day at the United Nations, and we're hoping to create change, create resolutions, make policy changes. So, again, just like to recap, the Blind Scientist Toolkit is just my way of kind of sharing my experience so that maybe hopefully people in the future, people of future generations, other blind individuals, teachers of the blind, it doesn't even have to be blind. There might be tools in there that are useful to you to you, to any of you in the audience. But my hope is that you'll have kind of ideas to bounce off of. And also recognize not everybody necessarily is going to be using the same tool. We're all created differently. Okay, and with that, I would love to answer any questions. If you want, I think there's a QR code on the screen, right? So if you would like, you can just swipe that QR code. That should take you directly to Blind Scientist Tools. And then you'll be able to see all the publications, all the different links to all the tools I've ever used. And hopefully, please share it. This project, so I started this project when I was a postdoc, like online, like putting it on the website, but now I'm being funded by the NSF Careers to actually promote and distribute the Blind Scientist tools. So thank you.